Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Isabel, and I am an Education Community Manager at ACCA. Today's session is all about the Advanced Audit and Assurance paper, and we have an expert tutor here to share her insights to help you with your preparation for that exam. The webinar will cover the December 2023 examiners report using technical examples, and we'll be giving you quick tips which further help you further during your exam practice. You're going to have an opportunity as well to ask your questions live, and our expert will be providing answers to the most asked questions from you students. So I am very pleased to be joined by our expert tutor, Afaf Noor. Thank you for joining us today, Afaf. Before I hand over to you, I do just need to cover a few housekeeping items and then we'll get to your introductions. At the bottom of your screen, this is to everyone watching, you've got a number of buttons you can use. There's a help icon on the left, and that provides resources and information that will help you resolve any technical issues you might experience. You've got icons for the slides and media player, and you'll need to see both of those during the webinar, so make sure you've got those selected. There's an attendee chat function, which I've seen some of you have already been using. You can use this to engage with your fellow webinar attendees, and the icon for that is on the right hand side, so do say hello to your fellow students. You've got a resource list, and that's the icon that looks a bit like a file symbol. And if you click on this, you'll be able to access resources relevant to today's webinar, including direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit you. You can resize the windows if you need to. And if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see the visuals move on, just refresh your browser, as that usually helps. And because you've registered for this webinar, you'll get an email tomorrow with details of how you can watch it again. So don't worry if you miss part of it or you have any technical issues halfway through, you'll be able to access it and watch in your own time. Now, I will hand over to Afaf in just a moment, but just to say I'll be back with you at the end of the session. But there'll be a time for live Q&A. So if you do want to ask ACCA or Afaf a question, then please click on the Q&A button, which is the middle icon at the bottom of your screens. Just note that we do sometimes get quite a lot of questions coming through, so we might not be able to answer to you directly, either verbally or through the web chat. But lots of the same questions come through. So hopefully if we don't answer yours directly, we'll still answer your questions. And I'm sure we'll be covering lots of useful information anyway. And with that in mind, I'll stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to our expert tutor, Afaf.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Hi, everyone. Like Isabel said, my name is Afaf. I'm an ACCA member. I've basically been teaching audit and qualifications, but primarily ACCA. I work with ACCA as an expert tutor as well for advanced audit and assurance. I've been teaching and developing content, developing mock exams, etc., for AAA for a very long time. AAA is one of my favorite subjects across all qualifications and in ACCA as well, primarily because this is a paper or an exam which is very easy to study, but slightly difficult to get marks in. So I have a lot of insights from examiners' reports over the past 20 years and from my interaction with the exam teams at various platforms as well. So in today's session, you will be learning quite a lot, particularly if you're a student who's not been able to get through AAA or has sort of failed between, say, 41 to 49, you should be able to identify where you're going wrong. And hopefully, if there are still any concerns, I should be able to answer your questions by the end of the session as well. So with that in mind, the agenda for today is we are going to have a look at the examiner's report for the recently published exam. So we all know that the September-December attempt, they sort of mix the questions and they publish a 100-mark exam. But the best part is that exam pretty much covers all the key areas. We are going to talk about particular areas like risk, procedures, reporting in quite a bit of detail. Based on all of that, I'll summarize the entire session by pointing out the common mistakes which could potentially lead to a failure in the exam, and I'll tell you how to avoid them. And like Isabel said, we're going to have a live Q&A where I'll try to answer as many of the common questions. I would highly recommend that when you're listening to the recording later on, you make a note of the key techniques that we discuss so that you can sort of apply those to your practice when you actually start. With this in mind, we'll just jump right into it. Starting off with the key concerns, and this is something which has been commonly communicated by examiners across various exam sessions. There is a huge concern regarding lack of knowledge, which is your financial accounting and audit knowledge. Please understand that whatever accounting standards you've studied in FR and SPR are assumed knowledge for AAA. Even if you haven't passed SPR, which is absolutely fine, you need to have at least studied it. Similarly, as far as audit is concerned, you need to be very comfortable with your key audit concepts so that you can apply them to the scenario. The biggest difference between AA and AAA is there's very little knowledge-based testing in advanced audit and assurance. So you need to have the basic concept and you need to apply them to the given scenario. Just to quickly sort of reiterate, if you are not comfortable with your accounting knowledge, when you're attempting questions on ACCS practice platform, if there comes up a particular standard, like for example, IFRS 8, that you're not comfortable with, go and revise that particular standard only. So that will substantially help you clarify wherever you're going wrong. For audit, you would have all the content in the study hub and you could actually revise it from there as well. The second reason that the examiners have shown for incomplete papers or not being able to pass is the inability to use the scenario, particularly linking information across exhibits in question number 1. I will talk about this briefly as well, but this is super important. Please remember, in section A, which is your 50-mark case study, you cannot study a paragraph in isolation and just stick to problems in that particular paragraph. So just to give you an example, in this paper, which was recently published, there was in one of the exhibits, they had written that the directors are given profit-linked bonuses. This was in exhibit 2 or 3, right? Then in another exhibit, they'd spoken about extraordinary items that they were trying to manipulate so that the profit figure goes up. You had to link the two to come up with a valid answer to get the available technical and professional skills marks. So please understand, a well-prepared AAA student needs to make the case study together and link the problems together to get the marks. Lack of awareness of answering techniques, which ultimately means you're going to lose out on your technical and professional skills marks. Remember, you have 80 technical marks and 20 professional skills marks across the paper. And the best part about AAA is there is nothing you have to do extra for the 20 marks. As long as you're following the answering techniques, I'll cover some of them today. Most of the techniques are there in the topic explainer videos across all basic topics. If you're comfortable with the answering techniques and you know how to manage your time, you can easily automatically get the professional skills marks as well. And last, but certainly not the least, not being able to complete the paper. Again, a well-prepared student is one who's done all their practice. And if you leave out, I guess, anything more than 5 marks, your chances of passing the paper go down. So the common theme across all exam attempts has been, you need to know accounting and audit. You need to know the answering techniques. And please, please, please read the scenario the poor examining team has spent months writing and apply it within the allocated time. So as we go through the rest of the session today, please make sure that you are comfortable with how these concerns can be managed for each topic in particular. Now, question number one, and this is something which all of you should be comfortable with, is set at the planning stage of audit. You should see this from the syllabus as well, where the syllabus is outlined. But again, you would know this from past exams as well. It's set at the planning stage of audit. It would always have risk as the major portion that is tested. It could either be business risk and audit risk, or it could be just audit risk or risk of material misstatement. Plus, it always has some procedures. So if you've identified, say, 8 risks in part A, about 1, 2, or 3 of these, those are the areas that you'd have to perform procedures on. And normally, the last part is from your ethical, professional areas or any other part of the syllabus other than completion. So in the recent September-December exam, question number 1 tested something that all of you struggle with, which is business risk. It also tested risk of material misstatement. It tested procedures on 2 of the risks that you had discussed earlier. And then again, something which isn't performed very well in the exam, it had a significant portion from ethical issues as well. We're now going to look at a few key points. And like I said, and I'm probably going to keep saying this over and over again, there is nothing extra that you have to do to get the 20 professional skills marks, as long as you're comfortable with the techniques that need to be applied. Now, for question number 1 in particular, a few things you need to keep in mind. Please make sure you read the requirement. A number of times, for example, in risk, she would actually say, the examining team would say, only use exhibits 2, 3, 4, or do not talk about this particular area of risk at all. So make sure you are comfortable with what is being asked, because that's the starting point of understanding the scenario. So the examining team has time and again said, please make sure you refer to the email that the partner would have sent you, which outlines the requirements. Like I said earlier, you have to, and there's no way out of this, you have to look for interactions between the exhibits, because that's how you get your technical and professional skills marks. So one example was the one that I gave you just now. I'll add on to that. Just at the start, they'd mentioned that directors get performance-linked bonuses linked to the profit figure, I think it was. And across the rest of the exhibits, they kept talking about potential manipulation. They were there were concerns about not capitalizing all the expenditure correctly. There were concerns about, are you sure you're booking the finance costs correctly, etc., etc. So you need to keep linking the information. Not in this one. I'll give you another example, which is my favorite for the interaction. There was a question a while ago, ACCA's past exam, where they had mentioned development expenditure in one of the exhibits. So right at the start, they'd mentioned something like they're developing an internally developed software, and they have capitalized it based on the pilot criteria, right? In the next exhibit, there was nothing about it. In the third one, there were concerns about availability of cash in the upcoming future. So remember, one of the criteria for capitalizing development expenditure is availability of resources to complete that project. So you have to put 2 and 2 together. You have to talk about the fact that number 1, you have capitalized this. I'm concerned the criteria may not have been met. And in the third exhibit, look, I found something. They don't have, or they don't seem to have the resources to complete this project. So subsequently, the concern is that your assets could be overstated. So be alert, practice this as much as you can when you're actually doing your questions on the practice platform, and you will start picking up trends. There are very repetitive and obvious trends that you can pick up once you've understood how this is sort of coming together. Now, something that you have to be very comfortable with in terms of marks that you have available for materiality. There are 4 marks in total. The examiner report has repeatedly said, why aren't you getting these marks? These are the easiest 4 marks that you can get in question number 1. So let's revise how you get those marks. In the partner's email, where the requirements are given, they will give you the benchmark that you have to use. So they will say that the partner has decided that you need to use either, for example, revenue or PBT or total assets as a benchmark. So use that benchmark. Do not question it. Do not make up your own guidelines. So you get 2 marks for calculating the upper and the lower limit of that benchmark. So in this question in particular, they had mentioned that revenue was meant to be used. We know the range, 0.5 to 1%. So you pick up the revenue figure from the case study, take out 0.5%, you get 1 mark. Calculate 1%, you get another mark. So literally takes like what 15 seconds and you've gotten 2 marks already. These 2 marks are the difference between a 48 and a 50, right? So let's not ignore them. Then you need to justify the threshold that you are using. Are you using 0.5%? Are you using 1%? Or are you using something in between? Please remember, the 3rd mark is for correct justification. You cannot write, I'm using the lower threshold because there are risks. The markers will say, thank you, we know there are risks. It's a risk question. So you have to actually, it doesn't have to be very fancy, something very basic, that there are significant risks related to judgment. Or in this question, there have been major changes in the group structure during the year, and therefore we're using the lower end. So literally that one line that you see on the screen, and you automatically get your 3rd mark. So imagine you've just started the paper, you've just started typing in your answer, and you've already gotten the 3 marks. How easy could it potentially be? And then there's another one, and this is the catch. You get, so these were the 3 technical marks. Then you get a professional skill mark for using this when you discuss ROM. We'll talk about this just now again when we discuss ROM, but using the benchmark that you've decided. Suppose 0.5% of revenue was 3 million. So every time you evaluate a ROM, you would say, this is material because it's above my 3 million benchmark. That's it. No more calculations, no more percentages, just referring to it or using it to say, oh, by the way, this is material. So I think it's been not less than 2-3 minutes on this slide, and you've gotten the 4 marks. So like I said, answering techniques and knowing how to get those marks is the key to passing this paper. And of course, this helps in time management as well. Now, keeping all of this in mind, we're now going to, so out of the 50 marks, by the way, I know I sound like a broken record. Out of the 50 marks, my 4 marks are done. So we're done with the 4 marks. Let's go on to the technical aspect, which was part A. So they have, in part A, they've asked you to evaluate business risk. Please remember, the requirement is evaluate, not identify. The examining team has 2 basic concerns. Do not speculate. Do not make up circumstances which are not given in the question. Do not give generic responses. You need to make sure you read the case study properly. You pick up the risks which are significant. Significant means they have a higher chance of actually materializing, and they are going to affect the business in a bigger or a more impactful manner. Remember, and this is important, business risk is from the management point of view. So you have to put yourself in the shoes of the management. Forget you're an accountant or an auditor. This is my company. I've just found out this is what's happening. What are you concerned about as an owner or the manager of this particular company? So no fancy accounting standards. I don't know accounting when I'm doing business risk. I'm sticking to thinking like the management. Now, as far as getting your marks are concerned, and this is something I spoke about earlier as well, the focus has to be on evaluation rather than just identification. So, for example, with reference to the question that we're talking about, stating that the loan may be repayable is just the starting point and will get you barely half a mark. You have to explain, so what? So you have a huge loan which is due for payment. What are your concerns? Your concerns about your ability to repay that loan, 1 mark. The concern is more because they've had recent expansion, they've had in other ratios, they've completely gone down, the liquidity ratios. That's your 2nd mark. So business risk is 2 marks per risk. You get half a mark for identification, which is literally just, picking up the point from the scenario. Another half a mark or 1 mark for explaining its initial impact. So in my example, I'm concerned about money and then explain why it is more important that this particular client is going to suffer because of this. So ultimately, talking about why this is a bigger risk for this client gets you your 2nd mark, which is evaluation. I'm now going to look at a well-evaluated risk, and I'll tell you the difference between a half and a 2. Now, in this question, and if you haven't read it now, you can go and read this after the session as well. This is quite self-explanatory, right? So in this question, they had done a large investment. You get half a mark for doing a calculation. So 25 stores multiplied by 5.75 million each, they've spent 144 million. So that's an addition calculation, half a mark, that you can put aside. Now, there is a risk that they might not be able to earn from this investment. So an inadequate return is my basic initial concern. I've spent money. Will I get something out of it? That's my initial concern. Now let's go or take it a step up. Evaluate or further evaluate why this is important for this client. So for this particular client, I'm concerned that when you shut down 5 stores, you also lost out on cash. So major outflow because of the investment, lesser inflow because you shut down 5 stores, and you're also concerned that the cost of refurbishment could overrun, which means a further deterioration in gearing and my interest cover, potentially leading to a breach of covenant. So literally, I started off with identification from the scenario. They've spent money, and I built it up by looking for information across different exhibits. This is what an answer would look like for you to get the technical and professional skills mark. So just to reiterate very quickly, and when you watch the recording, write it down as I say it. You begin with identification by using words from the scenario. Your initial development would talk about the basic problem you can oversee, but your further evaluation has to explain using points from the scenario why this is particularly important for the client or how the problem could become bigger because of other elements. So in this question, another element I linked was loan repayment or loan covenant being breached. Another element I linked was impact of the 5 stores being shut down. So going forward, identify, develop, and then further support it by information from other risks and other exhibits. That's how you get 2 marks per risk. And this is all that the examiners have said, excuse me, every time a business risk question comes up. I think I've been speaking too enthusiastically. Okay, moving on. The first part, business risk, sometimes comes up, sometimes it doesn't, but whenever it comes up, students normally struggle. So now when you go on to your practice platform and do your practice, you should be quite comfortable with it. The second part will always be there. So there is no way out. There is no debate about this. Every single one of you is going to be tested on risk of material misstatement in every single AAA exam question. The question asks you to evaluate and prioritize risks, and the word prioritize carries two professional skills. So let's have a look at this. You need to understand how and why a risk has arisen and how it could affect the financial statements. I'll make this very simple. Wrong is simply chances of problems in double entries or disclosures. That's it. So for this question, when you're reading the scenario, you're looking for chances of under overstatement in double entries. You're looking for disclosures which could be completely missing or they could be inadequate as well. So keep this in mind and your life will become much easier. When we say answering technique, or when we say evaluate, or when we say technical and professional skills marks, this is what you have to do. Start off by commenting on materiality. Remember, no percentage calculation. Do not make up your own amounts. Use your decision that you did a few minutes ago. So 3 million, I'm just making this up, was 0.5% of revenue. And over here, I'd simply say, this is material based on the materiality that I've set. You then need to talk about the relevant accounting standard. There's a mark for talking about the accounting treatment that should have been followed. So they should have followed this accounting treatment, for example, with reference to development expenditure or with reference to property, plant, and equipment being capitalized. Then talk about the risk. So the risk is that they have incorrectly capitalized revenue expenditure. The risk is they're not using the appropriate useful life. There is a lot of judgment in the useful life. So the risk is they might be biased as they decide the useful life. And because of this, these areas could be under overstated. So make sure that you explain the double entry because each part has a separate mark. So I'm concerned that revenue expenditure has been incorrectly capitalized. Therefore, assets are overstated, half a mark, and profit is also overstated. So complete the double entry to explain the financial statement impact. The second last bullet, explain the risk. That has your professional skills, by the way. The more you talk about judgment, biasness, the more you talk about, oh, I'm concerned they have intentionally manipulated this area, the more the chances are for getting the professional skills marks. Now, as an example, and I think I've just taken one example from this exam, they had capitalized cost in relation to renovation and extension program. Now, please remember, okay, yes, management are the bad guys, but they're not always the bad guys. So don't automatically say all of this should have been expensed off. That's not correct. Poor IS 16 talks about various things that need to be expensed off or capitalized, right? So how do I start? I'm to follow the answering technique. The cost is material. So the total cost, which was 144, we calculated that earlier, is material because it exceeds the threshold. Please note, there's no percentage. I'm not doing any further calculation at all. And the minute I use this for a few risks, I get my fourth professional skill mark. Then we talk about what the accounting treatment that should have been followed. So we know that renovation costs like decoration should be expensed off, but costs like purchase of land, creating car parks and building extension, remember IS 16, that can enhance the economic benefits for the client. All of that needs to be capitalized And this is the relevant accounting treatment. Don't talk about IAS 16 in general. You won't get marks for that. My concern is regarding what can be capitalized. So I'm only referring to that over here. The risk, again, I'm concerned that revenue and capital expenditures have been misallocated. They could potentially be incorrectly capitalizing costs that should have gone to P&L. And because of that, I'm concerned that assets and profit could be overstated. So if you're talking about misallocation, the problem could go in either direction. So under overstatement, both would get you the mark. But if you've specified that the risk is revenue expenditure incorrectly capitalized, then the impact is very specific. That means assets are overstated and profit is also overstated. In my example, I've covered both, so I've written the word mistake. But please understand, your examining team has been very clear. We do not give generic marks for saying things like, oh, everything is misstated. And they'll say, thank you, your external auditors. That's not why I gave you the money. Tell me exactly what the problem is. Which part of the financial statements could have concerns? So we've done, again, what have we done up till now? Just to step back and put this all together. I got my 3 materiality marks. Because I listened to AFAF, I'm comfortable with business risk. I followed the answering technique. I was able to pick up quite a few risks of material misstatement, and I got my technical and some professional skills marks. I'm done with my technical aspect. I now need to get 2 analysis and evaluation, which are professional skills marks, for prioritizing risk. This was a tongue twister, and I said it correctly. Anyway, so how do I prioritize risk? There are 2 ways of doing this. When you're typing up your ROM, you can order them from most to least significant, explaining why. So for example, renovation is the most significant because it's the biggest amount, it's most material. Or a related party transaction is the most significant because it is material by nature, or it has more chances of bias. So one option is to get those 2 marks, you just copy paste and put your risks in order. I never recommend that. I think it's a bit confusing and it takes up time. Follow the second option that she's given. After you've completed all of ROM, add a conclusion. This is not the conclusion to the case study. This is the conclusion to ROM, where you prioritize risk in a few sentences. You can have a look at the answers for September, December 23 and the earlier papers as well, because she's done this in very simple words. So they would say the most significant is this because of its amount, and in the second place is this because it involves judgment. So the minute your markers see that they've prioritized their risks based on materiality or the level of judgment or bias that is involved, you get your 2 marks. So quite a few of you are losing out on these marks simply by not typing up those 4 lines that are literally a piece of cake. Moving on to the third part. So we've done business risk and we've done a ROM, and we're now going to talk about procedures. Remember, procedures are always, okay, not always, let's say 99% of the time, going to be there in section A, and they are quite frequently there in section B as well. So you could actually see them in combination with the completion question or particularly a question on its own. In both cases, be it procedures or evidence, there are certain concerns that the examiner reports have highlighted, particularly the September-December one. So let's read the question very carefully. You have to design the principal audit procedures regarding the expenditure that they spent on enhancing the stores. So the 144 that I spoke about, you have to confirm that particular amount. It is always 1 mark per procedure. which means you should ideally come up with about 7 to 8 procedures. Make sure you cover the what and the why. Make sure your procedure is relevant to the requirement. Now, what do we mean by what and why, and what do we mean by relevance? We're now going to jump into this. This is from your exam. It is important that when you write the procedure, only stick to the ones which relate to the costs that have been capitalized. Keep thinking. They have capitalized 144. I need to make sure, is this correct? I need to make sure all of this should. So think about, could I potentially look at invoices or contracts or quotations? Remember, the focus is on the nature of expenditure. Does it stay in the SOFP, or should I move some of it to the P&L as well? The always portion on the screen is your technical and professional skills mark. Please remember, normally, I'm just saying normally to, I'm being risk averse. It's always there, by the way. But the procedures would have some element of judgment. In this particular area, again, there was judgment around which areas could be capitalized. There could be judgment around accounting estimates. So always focus on those procedures because they get you your professional skills marks as well. So what do you mean by what and why? A student typed up, review any relevant signed contracts from contractors, electrician, architects. This is the what. What are you doing? You're looking at a contract. Why are you looking at it? Are you just admiring the font? No, you're not. You need to confirm the amount capitalized. So what are you doing? Looking at the contract. Why? To confirm the amount that has been capitalized. The second one, for any stores being renovated at the year end, what are you doing? You're getting a stage of completion certificate. Why? You want to assess the costs that have been capitalized. So a lot of you would end up saying things like, inspect the invoice, inspect the contract, inquire from the management. And the markers would keep on saying, why? What are you looking for? So make sure when you're writing your procedure, you complete the what and the why, and that will make your life and your marks much easier. Now, in this question in particular, the examiners said that a lot of students ended up talking about minutes for approval. Now, that won't confirm the 144. Keep remembering, I am confirming the 144 and where it stays. So minutes for board minutes for approval, big fat 0. A written representation, absolutely not acceptable because there's better evidence available. There are contracts, there are invoices from third party. You're not going to say, inquire from the management, why have they capitalized it? Get them to give you a written representation. Again, written representation is weak evidence. Of course, use it as a starting point for accounting estimates and judgmental areas, but that's about it. It's not reliable evidence on its own. So the examining team was very particular that a lot of you wrote things like approval minutes and you lost all the technical and professional skills marks. So we've covered part C, which was your procedures. We're now moving on to the answering techniques for ethical issues. Remember, ethical issues are going to be there, whether you like it or not, in every single paper. It could be in section A, it could be in section B, but they do have an answering technique that you need to look at. Let's start. You need to start off, and by the way, this is the case for all questions in AAA, all topics. You need to start off by using words from this scenario that we call identification. So identify the threat, and then you have to explain by referring it to the code of ethics. So for example, I'm just making one up, which is not from this exam. The scenario says that the client wants you to base the audit fee on the profit before tax figure. And I know this is contingent fee. So you start off by identifying by saying this is contingent fee. You need to know the code of ethics to identify and evaluate there's a self-interest threat. Don't simply write self-interest, that's a zero. You have to explain it. There's a self-interest threat because you're going to compromise on your judgment because you want the PBT figure to be higher, your fee will also be higher. And tell me what to do. Address the threat means give me a conclusion. And for my example, unfortunately, this is not allowed. So my conclusion is you'll have to decline this arrangement and come up with an alternative one, which is ethically acceptable. So on an hourly basis or, for example, a fixed fee. So answering techniques, identification, explain the threads using the code, tell me what the code says about it, and then give me a conclusion. I want you to read this example extracted from your September-December exam. It's very specific, very frequently tested. Using Exhibit 5. So while I'm typing up the answer, on my left-hand side, I should only have Exhibit 5 open. Discuss any ethical or professional issues and recommend actions. So by following my answering technique, you're automatically doing this, by the way. When you read the scenario, the group FD does not have expertise to complete the conversion from Farland accounting standards to IFRS. So they had a foreign subsidiary and they needed to convert that. Your firm has been approached for assistance in this matter. They have requested as a part of your audit that your firm makes the necessary adjustments to the IFRS and then consolidate them. This was all given in the scenario. Red flag, this is preparation of financial statements. Now, how do I actually apply my answering technique? Let's start. We know this is accounting and bookkeeping services to an audit client. There's a self-review threat. Explain how. Then tell them what the code says. The code is very particular, be it private or listed. If it's not routine and mechanical. Routine and mechanical means there's no judgment involved. You cannot accept it. So unless the services are routine and mechanical, they should not be provided. In this example, the third bullet is my scenario. Because we're talking about adjusting complex financial statements, this is not routine and mechanical, and therefore we cannot provide this service. Please do not write safeguards. You will lose marks for this. You won't get technical marks then because you're contradicting yourself. You've just said this is not allowed. Don't give me safeguards then. So again, a proper evaluation using the answering techniques. Now, please remember, you can use your information on the study hub, the chapters, to make a summary of all the ethical codes, because unfortunately, you have no option but to learn it. You need to learn it to be able to sort of apply it to the scenario. We're now moving on to, just to quickly also let you guys know, because ethics is not a very well-performed area, please make sure that you read the technical article that the examining team has written. And then there's a topic explainer video that I did as well, where I gave more examples for different threats. So make sure you're comfortable with how the answering technique is. Now, we know, and this is again also specified in your syllabus guideline, that a question in section B is always going to be there from the completion and reporting stage of audit. Please do not misunderstand this. This is not just about opinion. This is completion and reporting stage, where opinion or report might be a very small part of this. So always, always there. Again, another topic that you can't really ignore in the exam. Now, she often uses the word matters to consider. She could use it in a completion question. She could use it in a procedures question as well. So what do you mean by matters to consider? So when you go to the management, how are you going to convince them to make an adjustment? That's matters to consider. So again, as always, this has an answering technique. You need to evaluate the accounting treatment. Whatever is given, what does the relevant accounting standard say about this? You need to talk about the issues, the problems, the risk, which are given in the question, and you need to talk about the under overstatement. So the good news is, this is exactly the same format as ROM. If materiality is given, you do that calculation as well. So materiality, if applicable, that's given, evaluate it. Are you happy with it? What particular concerns do you have about those accounting treatment that they've shown? And the under overstatement in the financial statements or a disclosure, which could be inadequate or missing. Now, with AAA, and this is my additional recommendation, right? It's not a part of your technique, but it's a part of my experience of over 15 years of teaching this exam or paper. Always, always look for concerns about management integrity. So for example, if there's any estimate or judgment involved, is there any indication that they might be biased? So what you're looking at is, are you concerned about management integrity? For this question, why weren't they applying the fair value method to all investment properties? Were they concerned there would be a downfall overall? Look for indicators of management bias. The related party transaction that was given in this scenario, was there a genuine need for this, or was this transaction carried out just to make the director happy? So trigger words in your answer which make the markers really happy as long as they're relevant. Don't just sneak them in thinking I'll get marks. Look for concerns about management being dishonest, pick that up. Look for concerns about intentional bias, pick that up, link it, and get your marks. Now, as an example, we've done this particular area. So in matters to consider, we said it's a material area. We spoke about the accounting treatment that should have been followed under overstatement. The next thing, and unfortunately, most of you are unaware of this, these are the super duper easy marks. I'm using my 12-year-old's language. Super duper easy marks in a completion question. The examining team would say, what do I do? Actions to be taken, not procedures, actions to be taken before I issue the audit report. There are technical and professional skills marks for this. Ask the management to correct this if they don't. If they don't, use the word if. Communicate this to those charged with governance. If they still refuse to do it, ask them to give you a written representation why they're not making those amendments. Consider the impact on other issues across the question and evaluate if you think this requires an engagement quality review. Remember, an engagement quality review is done by an independent partner other than the engagement partner. The reason could be it's a listed company where it is mandatory, or maybe there are other concerns as well. So you have those slides, make a note of these. And after this, when you read the answers to completion questions, wherever she has asked what 2 actions to be taken, you'll see she always gives this in the answer. Super easy technical marks. Then you were asked to give the impact on the opinion. She said, unfortunately, you guys are not comfortable with the concept of aggregate impact. So there were 3 issues. You weren't expected to talk about each individually. You couldn't say investment property qualified, related party adverse. You had to complete and evaluate the net aggregate impact. So she said, number 1, make sure you read the requirement. If I say each issue opinion, do it separately. If I say an opinion, 1, or the aggregate, then you have to calculate the net impact. And please do not write every opinion. The markers will literally give you a 0. So come to a decision. Is it qualified? Is it adverse? Is it a disclaimer? And only write that one opinion. Now, for your answering techniques, for writing opinion, start off by talking about materiality. So this is 6% of profit before tax, therefore it is material. Identify whether it's a misstatement or inability. Explain whether it is material or pervasive. Then write opinion. Fill these blanks out. Qualified except for due to material misstatement. Qualified except for due to material inability. Adverse due to a pervasive misstatement. Disclaimer due to a pervasive inability. So complete this to get your opinion marks and then explain how the headings will change and the content will change of opinion and basis for opinion. So the opinion paragraph will now be called this, basis for opinion will now be called this. In the basis for opinion paragraph, you will explain the nature, amount, and impact. So once again, in the first 1 or 2 questions that you practice, you will struggle with filling out the answering technique. But by the third one, you're going to be comfortable with how to get your super easy marks regarding completion and reporting. I did speed up towards the end because I was conscious that I had taken up a lot more time than I wanted. But I do want to cover a few very important elements. Kritika, would it be okay if we go slightly beyond the allocated time? I do want to make sure that I cover the, Isabel as well, here as well. I can't hear you, sorry. I'm not sure. Okay. I'm so sorry. You know what, I was making this for the rest of the audience as well. I did try and think, oh, should I just leave this out? I was like, no, they need to know this. These are easy marks. So I'm just going to wait for Isabel to come back to me on this one. And I will then see how much I need to speed up for the rest. It's not a lot left, though, by the way. It's just a few key things that I'm looking at. Okay, I'm just going to, I think, continue as it is right now. Okay. I think this probably potentially an area from my end. Okay. So by the way, very quick tips, nothing new at all. We already know we have to, okay, done, Isabel. We already know we have to complete the exam. Time management is essential. It's important that you use the 1.5 minutes per mark rule when you type up the answer. This is important, right? So for a 10 mark requirement, do not spend more than 15 minutes on it. 15 minutes at the most. This excludes the reading time that we're talking about. This is just the writing time. Follow the answering techniques. For the areas that we were not able to cover today, there are technical articles and topic explainer videos on ACCA's website. Please review them. Like I said, use the scenario. The examining teams have spent hours, potentially months, using that, so making those scenarios. So if you could please make sure that you use the scenario. And my key takeaway advice is practice. You have to make sure you do written time managed practice. We know that the mock has been released for the March exam. It was released yesterday. The debrief video is going to be available as well by the, let me have a quick look. I think it was the 16th. So the debrief video is going to be available by the 16th. Make sure you attempt the entire mock exam. Evaluate your ability to apply the answering techniques. Read through the standard answer. Watch the debrief video, and you can bring it all together to make sure you're well prepared for the exam. And with this, it's not bad at all, is it? We're now officially done with my over-enthusiastic summary of your exam reports. I'm now going to move on and start having a look at the Q&A session, the Q&A box, sorry. So I am going to, okay, so I have quite a few questions that have come through. I'm just going to pick up a few common ones and I'll start answering them. Oh, very good question, Zulkanan. In section B, for reporting an opinion or any other question, do we calculate materiality? The answer is absolutely yes, unless it is already given. So thank you for asking this. In section B, the examining tool would either say materiality has been set at 5 million. In that case, just use that. If that is not given, then you have to calculate it. You get a mark for doing that calculation. So it's only question number 1 where she will tell you which benchmark to use. For section B, all questions you might need to do a calculation unless it's already given. Okay, so I've been asked, it is a technical answer, the difference between material and pervasive, and this is for opinion, not for a report. So very quickly, material means the benchmarks, 0.5% of revenue, 5% of PBT, 1% of total assets. For pervasiveness, there is no guideline given, but there are trigger points. If there are problems in lots of areas, it's pervasive. If there's one problem, but it is a significant portion, for example, it could convert a profit into a loss, it's pervasive, or it could relate to a disclosure which is fundamental to users' understanding. So most commonly tested going concern disclosures. So if the misstate going concern disclosure, you could actually evaluate it as pervasive and give the opinion accordingly. The study hub content does explain what pervasive is. So I was asked materiality question for section B quite a lot. I hope you're comfortable with this. Oh, very good answer. If you have given, okay, so if we have given a few ranges, so for example, profit is given and revenue is given, Umair has asked this, it might be material to profit but not to revenue, it will still be material. So even if it's material to one area, we consider it a material misstatement and do your evaluation accordingly. Not at all. Oh, good question. For ethical threats, if it's a 10-mark question, this does not mean you need to look for 10 ethical issues. You need to make sure that you follow the technique. Within the technique, you get about 5-6 marks for each threat. So no, that's not required at all. Isabel, just let me know when you want me to stop answering the questions. I'm having a look. Quite a few of them were covered and I think are basically common. No, board minutes, listen, board minutes is a piece of evidence, but do not look at them for approval. You can look at board minutes for maybe the control that they have over a subsidiary. You can look at board minutes, for example, for concerns about recoverability of a receivable. It's the approval portion which is problematic, not board minutes. That's not the problem. Okay. So again, Adam, I just answered that. Board minutes could be for confirming an amount or particular probability on all of that. I think, oh, Faris has another good question. Just prioritize the top 2. So prioritize the top 2 risks to get your professional skills marks. Sorry, ROM is March. It's March attempt. Archana, MAR is March. This is for the upcoming March attempt. And ROM is risk of material misstatement. In question number 1, when you've decided the benchmark for materiality, this is for Kakra. If you've calculated the benchmark for materiality, do not calculate another percentage. when you're explaining risk of material misstatement, do not write this is 7% of revenue. Simply write this is material based on my materiality that I have decided. Don't list them. To be honest, you can do it most significant to least significant, Yash, but what you could also do is you could just simply give a conclusion. Isabel, I can't hear you at all. Do you want me to stop the Q&A now? Yeah, okay, I'll end now. I'm so sorry. So I think, guys, this is officially it from now. It's completely my fault. I should have left more time for this. But can I just quickly say, if you have a look at the technical articles and topic explainer videos, most of your answers will be covered. Thank you, Isabel. And I'm not, so yeah. So. Isabel, we can't hear you. I'm just going to push the next slide. This was my thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to quickly wrap up. I think you're already aware that the recordings will be available for you to review. Like I said earlier, if you could please make sure that you make note of all the techniques that we spoke about. And as a tutor, could I personally request you to make sure you attempt the mock exam question, review the debrief videos, because frankly, written practice and evaluation is the key to passing this paper. So thank you so much, guys. The absolute best of luck for your March exams. And I hope you get through and you don't have to take this exam ever again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.